All right, it's Ethan MUSOLINI, the Merchant of Success. Welcome once again to another program. Here we will be talking about building a winning corporate culture to think about the working system. So, what is it that we truly need? Once again, the framework I'm following or I've created, which I feel is very useful for us to be transformed, is number one, I focus on clarity to make sure that we know what we are talking about and why. B, we'll talk about the mindset. What's the mindset that we need that to make whatever I want to do succeed? And then three or C, I look at strategies required to make that outcome a reality. And then D, we look at the skill sets. What are those skill sets? And here we look at frameworks to make sure that the strategies we are thinking about actually come to life. And then E, we look at mastery. What do we need to have in place to make sure that we embody what we are learning or what we are going through, okay? So first, let's look at clarity to get going on this creating a winning corporate culture. Let's get this clarity going, so to speak. So when we talk about the organizational culture, we really mean organizational norms, values, beliefs, and the influence of the organizational variables for each employee. So when we talk about organizational culture, it's a combination. It's not like one thing, it's like a recipe. It's like having lunch. When you say lunch or we are going to have dinner, it's a mix of many things that make lunch or that make a buffet. So that's what organizational culture is all about in this concept, in this context. And when we talk about the organizational culture or the corporate culture, it's things like appearance. What's the appearance like? Because you know that we usually say that never judge a book by its cover, but guess what? We typically judge books by their covers, their appearance first, makes us, pushes us to make conclusions. Appearance makes us to make conclusions about people, about organizations, and therefore it's critical to pay attention. Ambitions. One of the characters I like following and paying attention to is Elon Musk, the guy of Tesla. The guy is so ambitious. I'm like, wow, it makes you feel like, what am I thinking? and ambition is part of the culture. I'm a soccer fan, for example, and I love, even though I'm an Arsenal fan. So one of the things that have been frustrating me of late is how we lost the ambition of being number one. So I love clubs that aim to be the best of the best, whether it's Madrid or Barcelona and the like. So, they aim to be the best of the best. They want the best players of late, some English clubs, whether it's Man City and the like. They're ambitious. They want to get the best of the best. So ambition is also part of the culture. So it could be very ambitious. You could set your culture to be super ambitious, or your ambition could be very low. Other one is ethics. See, there are some institutions which you find that if it is from this organization, then it must be true, or it must be of high quality. Okay, there are certain organizations where you hear. There's a certain organization. I was chatting with friend of mine. That person is a celebrity, at least here in Uganda, and she was saying, those guys of that organization, they are crooks. Ethics can be part of your culture. And by the way, these things I'm talking about, they also, I know later I'll be talking about personal branding. These things also apply in your personal life for you as an individual. So meaning how your appearance, your ambitions, your ethics, all that can be part of your personal culture and therefore part of your personal brand. The other one is values. What do you stand for? And I'll be talking about that a little later. So your values are part of the organizational culture and how you show up. Values is what's most important to you and the tenets you choose and the principles you choose to stand by. The other one is goals. What are the specific goals that you have? Going back to the ambition, for example, if you aim to be number one, then that, there are certain families, for example, just stepping a little bit away from organizations. There are certain families where they want their children to be number one in class. That's the culture. Then there is, I recall one, I believe it is, I need to remember the gentleman. He used to work with General Electric. He even published a book, Jack Welch, yes. So he said when he came in for the turnaround, he said, look, we are either number one or number two in the, if we cannot be number one or number two in the marketplace in these particular segments, or on these product lines or service lines, then we kill that business. So that was the goal. That's the standard. So the goal was to be number one, worst case scenario, number two. That's the culture that they set. And I was like, wow. Okay. Of course, it came at a cost, and yet he turned around the business. Expectations. So what are the expectations? What do you expect of people? Where my wife works, she was telling me that they are working on a project which is very intense. And she told me that the project team leader said, look, this thing has to be done by this time, whether you sleep on your laptop or not, I don't care. What matters is I need this thing by this time, period. Well, her expectation was that work had to be done, zero excuses, okay? That was the expectation. And there are people who, meanwhile, there are certain organizations who have the culture of, yeah, but you should also understand, sometimes things happen. Well, there are things, there are certain, there are organizations that set a culture of, you know what, it's results period, no excuses. Leadership style. So my leadership style, for example, is, create, generate. I'm not going to be all over your shoulders. Create. I'm going to give you space. I want results. I'm going to tell you where to go, but I'm not going to be watching over your shoulders nonstop. Meanwhile, there are certain organizations where the culture is, hey, they are sniffing around your nose to know every other hour how you're doing or how far you've gone. So certain leadership styles also define or show us what the organizational culture is like. Then company mission also sets the pace, the rhythm, not the rhythm, but shows us the direction and the area of focus. So company mission is very, very important. Then ways of being. When I say ways of being, there are certain organizations, for example, where their way of being is that of being very serious, uptight. Meanwhile, like us at Success Africa, okay, up until we not closed shop, but started working from home. By the way, for us, we've been working from home since the first lockdown up to now. So we pull each other's legs, meaning we tease each other. We tease each other a lot, say in meetings. And so you find, and there was one or two people who joined us, and for them, whenever you tease them, they would feel angry, they would take things personal, and they couldn't fit in. So if you ever want to work with us, you have to have a certain sense of lightheartedness, meaning not to take big teased or challenged very seriously, because then you won't fit. You won't fit in our culture. So that's part of our culture, and it's something I love, in that people are lighthearted and we joke with one another, and it makes the work environment more relaxed, okay, little more fun. Perceptions. Perceptions is also how people, how you think about your work, and also how the staff perceive the work environment and what's meant to be or not to be, okay. But then the question is, why build a winning corporate culture? Number one, a distinctive culture attracts great talent. Yeah. Again, following the soccer analogy, the soccer frame that I had set earlier, there are certain, the best players want to go to the best clubs for some reason. And then you'll find someone, a smaller club is willing to pay this fellow a salary or wages that are like even double, and says, no, me, I would rather go the other winning club, because they like the culture there. And even in the corporate world, there are people who are willing to go for a lower salary, but be part of a great culture, be part of a great corporate brand. So that's one of the things that is great about having a winning corporate culture. The other one is it creates organizational memory and ensures sustainability, meaning people know your ways of being. For example, one of the things which I've hinted on before is one of the things that I've been pushing, the culture I've created and I'm proud of at Success Africa, is the culture, notion, and way of being of having what I call open communication, meaning you are free to challenge, question openly, and know that you are safe. Okay, you can never be victimized for that, but you can only be victimized for not speaking up. Okay, hearing it in the corridors somewhere out there, and we don't hear it inside the organization. That is absolutely unacceptable. Okay. However, not however, and speaking openly is absolutely welcome and highly encouraged. And that's something that I keep emphasizing, so that it becomes part of who we are. Then you also attain your goals faster when you build a winning corporate culture. Let's talk about some key statistics about corporate culture. These are some of the numbers to look at. 46% of job seekers cite company culture is very important when choosing which company to apply to. Sorry, there is a typo, a mistake there. So the corporate culture is important. And I'm sure if I asked all of you, corporate culture is important to you before you go to any organization. The other number is 47% of active job seekers cite company culture as their driving reason for looking for work. So, knowing that I'm part of this thing that is winning, that is moving forward, inspires people. Also, employees who don't like their organizational culture are 24% more likely to quit. I know of certain people who have left certain organizations. In fact, I know someone close who left a certain organization and the culture in that organization was not espousing the idea of integrity. And that person left. Okay. Personally, I know if I was to work anywhere, I wouldn't. Okay. Okay. So for me, that's how things roll for us. Okay. So I'm seeing, okay. All right. So then now the next key that we need, now that we are done with clarity, let me just, before we go to mindset, Now that we are done with clarity, let's move to mindset. Let us talk about 5 enabling mindsets for building a winning corporate culture. Number 1 is, when we talk about winning corporate culture, is employee ownership mindset. Now, how do you build this? How do you connect this? Now, usually when organizations invite me to speak to their employees, I always tell them, look, you need to think as an owner, because typically before the owners take dividends into their pockets, they first pay salaries. So in some way, in one way or the other, you're an owner indirectly. Okay. Now, what does that mean for you as a team lead or a business owner or as a manager? What do you need to do to impart this mindset? You need to communicate that and say, look, how can I make the team feel like they own the vision, that this is their thing? And one of the ways to do that is to explicitly communicate how it's their creativity, it's their engagement that is making this happen. And therefore, in a way, they are owners. And it's out of their focus, energy, sweat and brow, and creativity that makes this happen. And therefore, they need to adopt that. And the other way to also do that is to motivate them and say, look, if you adopt the ownership mindset, then it will keep you motivated and inspired. Okay. The other mindset that is useful is problem-solving mindset. What I mean by that is, for example, my colleagues know if they come with an issue, in this case, a problem or challenge, they say, oh, Ethan, we have this other challenge. I always ask a standard question. So what do you suggest can be done? They know that's because I don't want to be just someone who generates solutions. My desire is to build a culture where people can think, and come up with solutions. One of my team members came and was telling me about an issue. There's something where they were falling short. I was not happy about that. I said, look, in this context, moving forward, find a way, find a solution, spend money if you have to, do something, then come to me and claim and say, you know what, I was stuck here and this is what I managed to do, and yeah, it took me this many hours and it took me so much money, but here it is, and so can I have a refund? That's what I want. I don't want to hear, you see, there were no, you had only given me money for this, but for example, let me just give a scenario. Or you had given me money for a border, but I could only use, the only solution would have been an Uber, and so I couldn't move. No, jump into an Uber, then later tell me, hey, by the way, you had given me this amount of money for this, and the context required this, and yeah, I delivered this. And though I spent this extra, okay? So I believe, again, I'm just sharing from my personal view, that's key. And by the way, as a side note, because again, we talked about part of my desire is that you grow through these sessions. If you really want to grow in your career, regardless of the position you're at, you need to develop a solutions mindset. So what I always advise people is when you're going to the CEO, for example, or your supervisor, always go with options. Say, you know what, there's this challenge, and I was thinking of potential solution 1, 2, 3. So what do you think? Okay. But if every time you go somewhere, you're just stating a problem, and you're not proposing any solution, then you're in the wrong pile of people. You're looked at as a problem statement expert, and you don't want to have such a brand. You want to be known as a solutions generation expert. Now, that's for you. I just do that. It's good for the organization, and it's also good for your personal brand always. The other key is total employee empowerment, meaning you empower people to make decisions, to be creative, to think aloud, to find ways to make things happen. So if people don't feel empowered, I mean, there is an organization I had, and apparently the CEO of this other organization had to approve buying of sugar or what kind of sugar. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That what people should have for break tea, that they, and what should be there, whether it's snacks or what, that it's, then what are the managers doing? What are the other directors doing? So I believe in empowering people, giving them space to create. The other one is appreciative inquiry mindset. Now, we won't go into details around appreciative inquiry. That's a way of thinking. I'll just give you a quick snapshot. So if you go on Google and you type in appreciative inquiry, there's a lot of content around that. But one of the tenets or one of the assumptions of appreciative inquiry is that when you focus on that, what you focus on becomes your reality. And one of the key principles also is that when you are investigating, start from what is working, not what is lacking. And in that, when you focus on what is working, then it gives you energy to address what may not be working. So when you say focus on what is working, that does not mean you forget what's not working. It's just that it gives you energy to be able now to address what may not be working. So that's very, very important. And the fifth mindset is mistake tolerant mindset. So what do I mean? My daughter will be turning 7 in 2 days' time. She's a perfectionist. So for her, everything has to be perfect. If something goes wrong, it's not surprised. But this is not perfect. It is not. Shouldn't have made a mistake. Like, no, it's okay. It's okay to make a mistake. The question is, have you learned from the mistake? What have you learned from this? And I usually push, okay, what have you learned from this? Say, okay, and what are you going to do differently next time? What do you need to do differently next time? The point I'm making is, if you start just beating people up, and when I say beating, I mean emotional and mental beating over mistakes made, then you're losing the point. Then it means people cannot take some risks. Of course, it has to be in boundaries also. But the point I'm making is, when people make a mistake, please do not turn it into a crime. Because then once it becomes a crime, now they cannot innovate, they cannot generate new ideas, because then they fear that if they make a mistake, they will be punished and banished. And then that limits the energy of creativity and innovation that you would have otherwise experienced or celebrated along the way. And I'm telling you, the key thing is not to entertain that people keep repeating the mistakes, though. Please mark my words there. So all I'm saying is, when mistakes happen, let the culture be, or the recommended culture, or the culture I would recommend, is that of learning from the mistakes and figuring out ways to make sure that those mistakes are not repeated again. So that becomes an opportunity for growth for the person, and it also becomes a platform to innovate and be better, such that, because when things are not repeated, then it means people will instead be repeating positive things. All right? Cool. All right, now we've looked at the clarity, the mindset. The next step is to look at the strategies, the overall strategies. Now, 3 strategies for building a winning corporate culture. So number 1 is values. And these are typically held by the leader initially, or the team lead, or those who set the pace. And it's typically defined in different organizational docs. For example, at Success Africa, we are guided by LEGIT, and LEGIT is an acronym, L standing for love of God, E standing for excellence, G for grit, I for integrity, T for team spirit. And of course, for me, I've been very clear and saying, there are certain non-negotiables, like integrity is non-negotiable. So meaning things like lying and cheating, I mean, I've had to fire people for that, just lying or cheating. So there's someone who came and lied to me that, I did this, only to discover that they were actually lying. They had not done what they was claiming to have done, and they had just joined us. And someone was telling me that they had done, okay, let me not go into the specifics, but so for me, that's not acceptable at all. Now you might say, okay, Ethan, you're being too ruthless. But here I told you that for me, I give people space to create. I'm not the kind to keep nosing around. So that means if you tell me something, I should trust that that's what it is. So the last thing I want to do is for you to tell me something and I start doubting. I don't want that. And I don't want to create that culture of lying and cheating. No, non-negotiable in my world. Now, for it could be a different game. For it could be, for me, the other things we can negotiate and talk about. But as an organization, there has to be that non-negotiable where, here you're either in or you're out, period. That's my belief. So because I believe that not all values are created equal. But for me, that's something that, I mean, it's, you cross the line, then you are out, period, okay? So it starts with the values and what are you going to focus on. The other strategy is observable artifacts. It could be the design for work, the shirts, the logo, there are those companies you just look, you see how they are dressed and, the art, what you see visually, you're like, oh, wow, okay, this is what these fellows stand for. And then the third one is basic assumptions. So, for example, aiming for the best could be one of those assumptions. Open environment to share. Now, that's a core assumption at Success Africa, as an example. The other assumption could be, for example, all are respected. I cannot deal with people who disrespect others. No tolerance for harassment. That's not acceptable either in our space at Success Africa. So there has to be certain assumptions, things which may not necessarily be written down, but it's assumed. So, for example, at Success Africa, we are into transforming lives. Therefore, the assumption is you must love people. If you don't love people, then you won't manage. If you don't believe in transforming lives or transforming organizations, then, so our assumption is you should be driven towards transforming lives and transforming organizations. That's what it is. And that's a typical assumption, for example, in our space. So you also need to think about those 3 things. What are those core values, and amongst the values, what's non-negotiable? How do our artifacts look like? And what are the basic assumptions and when there are those basic assumptions, you have to talk about them so that people know, and then it's part of organizational memory, so to speak. All right, cool. So we are done with the strategies. Now I need to pull up the skill sets to see, okay, how do we then unpack this to make all this come to life, okay? Now that we are done with the clarity, the mindsets, the strategies, let's look at the skill set. And when I say skill set, it's really the tactics to make sure that the strategies we are talking about come to life. Okay. Skill set, here is, let's talk about the step-by-step formula to building a winning corporate culture. Okay. Number one, you need to define who you are, the values, the mission, the strategic objectives, and what you stand for. And I also have to emphasize that it's not just about clarifying things, it's also about figuring out ways how you can live those things. So, but there has to be that clarity. Now, if your business is just starting out, so to speak, one of the ways to come up with things like values is look at your personal life. What do you value most? What is it that you value most? So, like at Success Africa, to come up with those values, we looked at what we valued the most as a team, and that's how we came up with that. We looked at the common themes. Number two is you need to identify the different cultures in your organizations at the moment, the dominant culture, subculture, and the counterculture. When I say dominant culture, I mean, what is the overall way of being and doing things? What's that? When we say, because I told you like the overall culture at Success Africa, for example, and when I look at our values and the strategic objectives, it's about and the vision, it's really about transforming lives and organizations. And yet the subculture, it's really, for example, you'll find certain departments or units have their way of being or doing things. Usually you'll find, for example, the sales and marketing teams, they are usually hyper, they want to go out there and make things happen. And meanwhile, finance, they are usually, again, it's not a rule, but usually they are karma types. They want to make sure that things are thorough, that they are orderly and all that. So once you've defined the values and things that you don't want to stand for, once, I beg your pardon, that's for number two. But once you have that clarity of values, mission, strategic objectives and all that, then you need to look at the culture in the organization already. And then you support the culture that is in line with your objectives. Now, one of the things that we used to do, which I feel we need to start doing, which we used to do before lockdown, was that before every meeting, we would recite the mission, the vision, and the values. Because one of the embarrassing things I've noticed is sometimes when we're invited to work with organizations, you say, okay, who can recite the organization's mission or vision or values? And people fumble. And you're talking about sometimes as many as 150 people, 200 people, and like one or two hands go up. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when the person joined the organization, they read through the mission, the vision, the values, and then they drop the document somewhere. And I also can't blame them. So part of the way of being that I feel is useful would be to do recitations, or to recite these things like values, mission, and all that, because then it sticks in people's heads. Now, the truth of the matter is I borrowed that idea from Rotary. Because in Rotary, in every fellowship, always there is a recitation of the four-way test. Then it sticks in your head, in your heart, in your spirit, and before you know it, then it becomes a part of who you are. So you need that. Positive reinforcement means that when someone does something that you appreciate, that you love, that you find useful, then you celebrate it, talk about it, that what is appreciated is you reinforce what you appreciated. I beg your pardon. What you appreciates over time. Then what you appreciate becomes a motivator for other people to make sure that what they have done can be done again and again. And that it could also be that you're the type of organization that loves to party. Okay. Now, I'm not in that category myself. I wish I was, and I believe it's also how I was brought up, because my dad really, was, when looking back, my dad, anything related to just having fun or the like, we were beaten. So it's like it has stayed in me in one way or the other. So hopefully, as I get younger, I will change. Then the other key thing to remember is you need to align your leadership team to drive the culture and the business agenda. The fourth one is drive employee culture ownership. And one of the ways to do that is to say, okay, what does this culture mean to you? So meaning you ask these questions to dig deep to see, where does the person stand with what we are talking about? Does it really mean anything to this person? And one of the ways you can do this, by the way, is at the stage of hiring, to notice and say, okay, what does this concept or idea mean to you? And by the way, a quick tip that I've shared with some of my closest clients that now I'm going to share with you is the trick question I usually ask before people join our organization is to ask, what's most important to you? Now, when I ask what's most important to you, I want to hear their values. Now, that's what I used to do anyway. Then I upgraded it. I learned this trick question. So you ask, okay, so in your best friends, what values or what qualities do you admire the most in your best friends? Now, guess what? The values they admire the most in their best friends, those are the values that they practice. So meaning, if I'm listening to the person and I don't hear things like honesty or integrity, for me, that's a big question mark. Okay. So one of the ways to generate or create a desired culture is to make sure that we get the people we are hiring first time, we make the hiring right. There's that book, Good to Great. It talks about having the right people on the bus. Jim Collins, he says, look, get the right people on the bus, meaning if you have people with the right mindset, with the right values, the rest you can figure out. But I will tell you, if someone has different values from you, and they don't have to be exactly the same, but I'm saying if the core value, like the integrity part, is not right, then you're going to struggle. Okay. So when you ask, what does this culture mean to you? Then you get them to own, to embody what it means to them at heart. And then as they're describing it, then they will start owning it up. The next question is to ask, how can we live our values? Ask people, how can we live our values? And what are you going to live? What are you doing to live by these values? So I recall there is a time, and again, I'm saying this because as a reminder also, in that we had reached a stage where we would, whenever people would be reporting, they would be saying, okay, this is how I practiced this value, this is how I lived, this is how I practiced this value. because I believe values are not just something that you talk about or speak about, it is something that you live. So for me, that's if there is one thing that is extremely crucial, the living and practicing and espousing the values that are crucial and important to you as an organization is the key driver right there. Because, I mean, there are certain homes we knew when we were growing up, and you knew that those guys are truthful, or these guys, they are very clean. That's what they lived by. That's what they espoused. Oh, this family, they are into sports. They espouse that. They lived that. In the same way, what will set you apart as an organization is what are those values that you're living. And then finally is aligning your leadership team to drive the culture and the business agenda. So it's really about challenging the leadership team to see, how are we living this? How are you supporting your team to live these values? How are we measuring up on a scale of 0 to 10? How are we measuring up? Where 10, we are on the best of the best in terms of living these values. So because it's the leadership team that will make things happen by supporting the teams that they are leading. Very, very important. Okay. And I had said lastly, sorry. So, and then the key thing is to communicate consistently and celebrate milestones. You have to think about it like a song. So how do you get to the lyrics? Well, I will tell you, my wife is brilliant at getting the lyrics, and my daughter. That's not an area that I'm strong at, getting lyrics of music in my head. But what I know for a fact is to get those lyrics, you rarely get them the first time. You repeat it over and over and over again, then you get it. And also, to celebrate milestones. What I mean by that is it's not just about you communicating when things have gone wrong. It's just to know, oh, okay. So I like it sometimes when I see online, oh, we are celebrating having 1,000 subscribers. Oh, today we are celebrating having 100,000 subscribers. That's a milestone that they are celebrating. Oh, we are celebrating having done this. And what that does also, it's good for your psyche, it's good for the psyche of the organization and the team to know, okay, they are appreciating the milestones. Oh, and I guess what? When you say celebrate milestones, you're celebrating a win. So then, because you're talking about a winning corporate culture, so they're like, oh, okay, winning is celebrated here. Winning is valued here. Something that we talk about over and over again, or winning is something that is rewarded. So in essence, you need to be thinking, okay, how can we celebrate these milestones? What do we need to do to make sure that for whatever is, or whatever is happening, or whatever good that has happened, how do we make sure that we are celebrating that and talking about that? Okay. Because when we do that, then we are passing on a message, either consciously or unconsciously. Okay. Cool. Now, before I talk about mastery, now let's talk about mastery. And when I say mastery, I really mean, how do we then embody this knowledge and make sure that we practice it and live it, and it becomes a part of who we are? Number one is review your organizational documents. Are they in alignment with the culture you want to drive? Because sometimes you could be surprised when you finally discover that, hey, what you're saying and what is documented and what you're aspiring to have or be are two different things. So it's crucial that you double check that. Excuse me. And if you're a manager and you discover that there are things that are not in alignment, then it should be part of your mandate to challenge the top leadership realign and review things. Next is define the culture you want in a 5-step model. So more or less like really 6 steps because there's that communication aspect. So, so let me review that, sorry. So we are on the same page. So it's really 6, not 5 upon review. So what you need to define the culture that you really want to see, because if you don't, then you're doing yourself a disfavor, so to speak. Next is display artifacts and insist on them. I've seen organizations, insist that, for example, okay, let me see. I had stopped sharing. Okay, sorry about that. So also display artifacts and insist on them. I've seen organizations whereby it's a standard. You have to make sure, for example, there's the values are on the table. I used to be a training consultant with British Council for years, and their values, they invoked something that was like in glass, and it had to be on the employees' table. I know later when another country director came different, but I liked that. It was really cool. Then also get your employees or team to share how the organization can live the desired culture, meaning you get people to start engaging and defining and challenging them. Okay, how can we live these values? What else can we do? What are we doing well that is in alignment with the values or within the organizational culture? What else can we do differently to become even better? So in other words, you're engaging, you're pushing to make sure that people are living this. So if you do this, then I really believe then you should be at a good place to make things happen accordingly. Okay, cool. So again, now the key question is to ask, what did you find most useful in this presentation, and figure out how are you going to implement the lessons moving forward in your life and career stroke business. All right. So right, so some questions coming through. Let me pull them up here. And they are very useful questions, by the way, which I appreciate. As always. As always. So, and the question I recall was around, okay, so how do you, let me stop this. Okay, it has come up. Gerard was wondering, how do you develop a problem-solving mindset in a team of members beyond emphasizing or talking about it? Yeah, so for me, one of the best ways, so that's a great question, Gerard. So I believe that we can emphasize, it's not just about talking, it's about also challenging people. When I say challenging people, as an example, so is to say, look, you have this, so you're proposing this. What are you proposing? Say, and someone say, okay, I thought you would be the one to talk about it. I say, and I usually tell them, look, I'm not, and also it's not just about talking about it, it's also showing them the value. Say, look, I'm going to, if you really want a response from me, I want to first hear your own options, because I want to build a team of leaders, not employees. I want a team of intrapreneurs, people who can create value within the organization. So you challenge them. So that's what I've found to be workable, at least from my own perspective, to push people. Say, okay, so what are you proposing? You ask, what are you proposing? And you tell them why you're pushing for that. So you challenge them to think outside the box, to come up with their own solutions. And then over time, they'll get to know that, okay, you can't go to Gerard if you don't have options. Tell them, look, once you have come up with options, then you can come and we talk about this, because I want us to discuss options. I don't want to just be, I want to create a team where we co-create things, not just taking orders. Because if people are not generating solutions, then they are waiting for orders, to be ordered, to be directed. Say, no, I want creators, not order-taking personalities over time. So then over time, they will know that that's what it is. Okay. Victoria, I believe you meant ownership mindset. And what I meant by that is for people to feel like, you know, they are part of the business, part and parcel of the business. Gerard, please let me know if I've answered your question. You can type in the chat box. And also Victoria. I saw another question earlier from Justine. And that was, yeah. So Justine says, Ethan, great lessons learned every day, and you task us, what are you going to do differently from now onwards? My personal challenge is what to start with or how to order them, etc. I would love to practice many lessons, but the reality is different. Please guide. So to practice, this is what I would suggest. Start with one piece at a time. So let me, and that's a great question, and I will tell you why. Because, okay, so let me first. So Justine is asking, I say, okay, there are many things that you've shared with us, Ethan. So where do I start from? You know, that's the challenge. Now, great question, because ultimately it's about implementation. So this is what I would do if I were you. If you do not have clarity around values, the write-up around values, missions, strategic objectives, and the like, which I would imagine for you already have, then I would start from there for some of us who don't. Yeah, because clarity is extremely important. And then have some kind of screening. So, okay, how are we living this? And you could even get a team together to start thinking and reflecting. On a scale of 0 to 10, how are we living these values? On a scale of 10, how are we living our mission? On a scale of 0 to 10, how are we living strategic objectives? And then, of course, you will discover that you're not at a 10 out of 10, and then start challenging people. Okay, say, what do we need to do to make sure that we start living the values, the mission, and the strategic objectives? And then you start checking in every time you meet. Okay, so for me, what I found very practical, at least from my own personal experience at Success Africa, is checking in, okay, how are we living this? And people reporting, how are they living the values? And then the other small thing which you can do, which to me is a big win, is actually reciting these mission values and the mission, vision, mission, and values. Because then over time, as you're saying these, you're like, okay, but we are saying this, but we're actually not doing it. Then you start feeling jittery, you start feeling a little anxious and guilty, and then it wakes you up to live that. So for me, the clarity, then number 2, have a conversation with the team. Number 3, start reciting these things. And then number 4, of course, saying, okay, how are we living these values on a day-to-day basis? How are we measuring up? Okay. Justine, you can let me know if I've answered your question. Let me see. We had another question. All right. So Nathan is asking, how best do you advise we adopt and implement these strategies and tips for a startup service business whose systems are not fully built or not fully established to support these business functions because of the infancy stage it's at? Now, so for me, the key thing, Nathan, looking back, if someone had told me this, it would have saved me at least 10 years of frustration and scratching my hair. So even if you're a team of 2, start, get this done. And later, I find that it's helpful when you get like an outside party or consultant to help you think through this to make sure that they are fully functional. And even if you don't have the funds to pay a consultant, go online, read about how to develop these things, have them in place. Even if it's just a team of you and your wife, then you can recite these values and then see, how are we living these values? How am I living this value today? And then over time, then for everyone who comes on board, you onboard them on how you're living those what you've captured on paper. Okay, Nathan, let me know if I've answered your question. Justin says, sure. Nathan sees slide. Okay, yes, indeed. Great guide indeed. Cool. Jojo says, also including KPIs in performance measurement of staff capturing the core values can help. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jojo, for that addition. You know, how they are live, you know, the core values, because then the KPIs, of course, they also have to be in alignment with the strategic objectives. And also when you say doing appraisals, to make sure that, you know, you're asking people these questions, how they are living that. Thank you so much, Jojo, for that contribution. Okay, cool. So please go ahead and type in the chat box. Nathan is helpful. Thank you, Ethan. Start out regardless and have new members plug into the culture they find in existence. Yeah, absolutely. They have to plug into what is already at play. But if they don't find it there, then what are they going to plug into? Then they are lost. Okay. And this is something made me lose a lot down the road.